Of all the new specs on this beta, I didn't expect evoker to be the most controversial one. And there's an insanely huge Reddit post talking about evoker with 196 comments. That's a lot of discussion. But I absolutely loved evoker, even with its faults. So let's read through a few of these comments and a few of the complaints and figure out what is wrong with the spec, why do people not like it, and how it can be fixed. Subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Go to my Ko-Fi if you want to support my content. Go to my Twitch to watch me live every morning, and let's get into it. The first comment, and the one that I've seen a lot through, and is even in this Reddit post, is about the familiar. Pet summoner classes generally provide flexibility and customization through having different summons that can be called to respond to different situations, or a single customizable pet that has similar different abilities or can have its abilities customized to the player's liking. The evoker summon has neither. The trade lines do not allow you to customize what the pet does. The pet does not have different abilities for the players to have to choose which one to use on this specific situation, and you cannot switch between summons in combat. This reduces the pet to merely an auto attack because there is no player decision making involved at all with the pet. Now, going through this, the first thing that makes me think is that, well, you are stuck with one of your familiars. If you go to water, if you go to air, if you go to earth, this will actually not change your familiar, and this kind of sucks because, for example, Toad in PvE is not gonna be very useful. Even in PvP, there's a discussion to be had that maybe it's not gonna be used ever. And maybe you want to have your otter sometimes played, you know, even if you're playing fire, you want to see them, and you have your utility, you have your elite that shows all of these specs at the same time, all of the little attunements, all of the familiars, but that's only the elite. It's not like whenever you use your elite, your utility with your Fox Fury, the fire fox appears, or when the water one appears. Doesn't really have that, right? I think putting, like, even if it's the same animation, just making the fox appear just for a second when you're casting this, or the hair appear when you're doing this, I think would be a great thing. And honestly, let's say that you actually have the fire attunement, but you go to water. It would be very cool if for a second the water otter just makes a little animation, just flying around, be like, hey, I'm the water otter, I'm here for you because I'm your familiar for water. And maybe you still have the firefox, but there you go. I think those kind of little details would be very helpful for people to feel like they're playing a summoning class instead of just, hey, just one particular element every time. That being said, this doesn't help with the customization thing that this comment is talking about. I do understand this because, well, in other games, there is a little bit more to this kind of specs, to this kind of ideas. You know, I haven't played Final Fantasy XIV Summoner, but I've heard that they have a lot of different summons for different situations, and that's actually a pretty cool thing. That being said, I do think it's important to notice that this is not a problem with Evoker itself, but with Guild Wars 2. There's not that much customization when you're talking about pets in this game. Not for Ranger, maybe a little bit for Ranger with like, oh, Aryan pets do a little bit more damage or whatever, but it's not very significant. Not for Mechanist or not for any other types of pets, not even in Necromancer with their little minions, or for spirits for that matter in Ritualists. You could argue that there's a little bit of customization because you have your traits right here. You know, one of them makes it so whenever you use any sort of familiar skill, your hair does a little bit of arc of lightning, right? It's not like the hair appears there. You could argue the same thing for the burn one, and you know, the fact that whenever you use a skill, you get the burning and you know, some healing, some restoration, right? Some regen. Or then Earthen Fortification makes it so whenever you disable an enemy, if you have Toad, you have more protection. There is a little bit of it, but it's not very direct with each of the little familiars. So I understand the critique. That being said, we also have, you know, familiar focus that makes it so all of these familiar abilities change in some way. I would kind of argue that this is some sort of customization. The same thing goes for the boons. And you can maybe even argue that the specialized elements is also this way because it forces you into, well, it's more about the element, it's more of an element customization more than the attunement itself, more than the familiar itself. So, yeah. But I think these ones in some ways do indeed customize. They could be better, but yeah. I'm not gonna lie, I don't think the customization here is the problem. I think the problem is that you're stuck with one of these familiars, and that they don't really do that much on than you know, pressing the button and that's it. There's no interactivity between the elements. It would be way more cooler if, let's say that you have your fire fox and you use it on Earth, you use the familiar skill on Earth, maybe it does something different. That would be kind of cool. Right now, it's just you pick the fox and you press F5 and you always use it in the same manner. There's not really any reason to move to other attunements. So in a lot of ways, what's the difference between playing evoker and pressing F5 every time you get enough of your charges to get your special big attack just like this, or playing catalyst where you try your best to build energy, your charges, to press your big attack? Yeah, sure, it's a circle instead of, you know, a big attack, but I mean, it's kind of the same idea. There is a little bit of a difference because obviously in Mr. Catalyst you actually change attunements and you're trying to use all of these buffs from all of your attunements, right? And put all these boons on the floor, and you know, you get all the animation from your you know, your familiar, if I may say, in Catalyst, your big animal that appears right there, and you keep going. You have an incentive, just go between every one of the attunements. In Evoker is actually the complete opposite. You're actually punished from going to other attunements, because obviously in these ones you are gonna get less charges because you're not on the original one. So you wanna, even if you go to another attunement, you wanna go back in instantly. So it does feel a little bit different. But pressing F5 every few seconds because your charges got big again, it does feel very much like Catalyst, and there is something to be said about that, and how you maybe should have something a bit more different to change it up a little bit. We've been playing with Catalyst for many years, so it should feel more distinct, and I think I have a good idea on how to fix this. Not only this idea would fix it feeling too similar, but also with the customization. If we make it instead so whenever you press your F5 you get a different effect through different attunements, not only you will get a bit of a better interaction between the elements and the familiar that you have, but also, let's say that, you know, I'm Fire Inferno Fox Evoker, but I need some stability. Maybe if you use your F5 while you're on Earth, it gives you stability for 1 second, right? So you go in here, oh, I need the stability right now, and you just go there, maybe lose a little bit of damage, whatever. And whenever you do this, let's say that, you know, let's say you go into air and instead it will give you some Aegis, for example. Maybe whenever you press F5 on air, your hair will appear just for a little second, even if the whole ability from the Firefox is played out. The hair appears there to infuse the Firefox with lightning, just so you can get that effect as well. And of course, for the water one, you can have the otter appear instead. I really feel like this could make it much more better, much more interactive, instead of just being stuck with one familiar that does the same thing every time. You get a little bit more interaction between everything. I would make this baseline. I doubt that I will make it into a trait, but I think this would really help this differentiate itself from Evoker, while also having some cool interactions that make sense for what the familiar class does, and still keep its identity. The next problem I've seen talked about is specialized elements. According to this guy and a lot of people that I've seen, this was a really cool idea that is much unfinished. Although specialized elements works as a complete build for fire, there are significant problems with the other elements. Elementalist weapon skills are designed to have their kit scattered across different elements, and by limiting yourself to one element, you no longer have access to part of your kit. And reducing the cooldown does not fix the problem. Specialized elements needs Arena to actually articulate what is an earth, water, air only elementalist. What role should an earth, water, air only elementalist do? Are there any weapon combinations that can actually fulfill this role? If not, what is missing and needs to be added? This overall vision of what a single attunement elementalist should be is clearly not existent. The pets have a great opportunity to provide the functionality to fulfill in these gaps, rather than just being an auto attack. Now guys, I just want to say I am a one attunement Ellie enthusiast. I love how fast it feels. I love the build spender of this. I absolutely just love the fact that once I'm done with it, I can just press my thing and get all of my cooldowns back and go again. I love how intense it is. This is my favorite. It might be my favorite build this patch, just playing this one. That being said, I do understand what they mean. This works pretty well for fire, yes, but for air, for water, for earth, not so much. And the Arena have a big issue here because this person says, oh, we need to give them to the weapons, we need to do something with this. They can't really, because there's no special weapon for evoker. So how do you change weapons to work for water, for air, for earth, without completely destroying the balance of the other specs in Elementalist? You just can't. It's just not possible. Instead, what you have to do is change the trait in some way. Specialized element right now, it gives you more charges and it makes you reduce your time of your cooldowns. But it probably requires more. Maybe not for fire, but you could make it so every time you use your F5 when in specialized elements, depending on the familiar you have, you get something different, right? I don't know what you actually would bring, but maybe with Calcify, with the Earth one, you inflict more bleeding, right? So you can maybe do a candy build with it only total build, right? That would be very fun because a lot of the stuff here on Earth are about crippling, are about bleeding. It makes sense. Maybe some stability. For air, maybe it makes it so you're always critting, like regardless of what you do and what stats you have, you always crit. That would be kind of cool. It makes sense with what air is, and maybe, I don't know, it gives you some fury and some super speed. You have perma swiftness, I don't know, something like that. And for water, obviously it would be the heal one, and maybe you actually do give, this would be kind of interesting if you make it so maybe this also gives quickness, for example, and you have evoker as a spec that can do quickness or alacrity. It kind of already does with the traits that can give alacrity through air and quickness through water. So maybe this, well, I guess it wouldn't really make sense with the alacrity thing. How can water do alacrity and quickness depending on the trait? I don't know, maybe it just gives quickness anyways and you make it so it gives way more healing in some ways. I don't know. It would depend on the balance, right? I'm not like an elementalist main, but whatever the weapon is missing, it can be given by these specialized elements traits depending on the familiar you pick. I think this shouldn't take too much effort for Inet to do, and it would definitely work out very well, especially because heal evoker right now is not very much good right now. I know a lot of people are talking about way more hard stuff to make, like way more interesting stuff, but realistically Arena does not have the bandwidth right now to develop that even from the start, and definitely not in 2 months. And the whole like, hey, you can now change weapons in attunement, in one attunement, I think it probably wouldn't work. At the end of the day, they did talk about how this would affect balance a lot in a very negative way towards everybody but evoker. So I do think it's not a real possibility, right? It's too hard to actually balance this. So I think, well, personally, obviously, I think that my suggestions are so much better, but let me know if you think something else. Also, if you are getting tired of pressing F5 all the time, guys, if that is happening to you guys, rebind your keyboard, your F5, to something that is a bit easier. You're gonna have to press it a lot if you like evoker, so you just come in here, come to professional skill 5 and change it to something else. I think some people have been talking about changing it to Q or R, something close to the WSD keys. I think it's a very, very good idea. But yeah, that's my opinion. I think all these things should happen. I think every time we change attunements or we indeed use an utility, the familiar that is associated with that attunement or utility should appear for a second so you can see them more. I think we should be getting different interactions using the F5 depending on the attunement. And I think the specialized element should be getting more buffs, different boons and different interactions with the F5 as well as just the recharging. I think these 3 things are pretty easy to do. They should be able to do it in 2 months and would make Evoker one of the most interesting specs of the entire beta. The ideas are there, guys. It's fun. The gameplay is very fun. It's very intense, which is kind of funny because the single attunement elementalist idea was kind of for people who didn't want to play a piano class, but I'm not gonna lie, I feel like this is the only piano class in elementalist, and Tempest, for example, is way easier. But let me know what you guys think. If you guys like my ideas, if you have other ideas that are, you know, doable for Inet, I'm just curious. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Go to my Ko-Fi if you want to support my content. Go to my Twitch to watch me live every morning. See you guys around. Love you all. Ciao, ciao.